It may sound funny, but I understand what you're saying. But just picture this: you come home, you know that, all right, good, you got a particular piece of jewelry, expensive piece of jewelry, or you got a particular safe that you know has got a little stash. Some people would still want to do that, right? And then you come now and you discover that your door is jammed open, or wrenched open. Um, you're thinking about calling out police with me. You gotta check to see, if them things still there.
It
Right?
happens.
And then, something, yes, you hold, you touch, you do whatever the case might be, then discover, or, sometimes the people don't carry everything. Some of these people got manners. They take some and they let back some. And they sit down, they check it up, and then they discover, well, or for whatever reason, it mightn't be manners, but maybe they were, alerted otherwise, so they didn't get a cart off everything, right? But then you, as you rightly would have mentioned, tumble, right? It's kind of like a human nature that you find persons will want to go see if they could secure what.
Yeah, that's true. It happens. But you gotta remember, at the end of the day, you want justice,
Mhm.
and you want that particular perpetrator to be caught, to be put behind bars. And this is not just for you. Uh, when you damage a scene and make it difficult for us to get evidence, it increases the chance of that person getting rid of crime. And tomorrow he's gonna go at somebody else's door, and he's gonna continue until the police they're being caught. So, as part of your duty to yourself to get justice, and as part of to help prevent others from suffering the same fate, you gotta focus and you gotta do the right thing. Secure the area and get the experts there, and they're gonna process that scene. So we can able to identify the perpetrator.
Have you have had situations where, in terms of fingerprinting, you find a fingerprint that doesn't belong to anyone who is, let's say, a resident or a domicile at that place that had the incident? Um, and you go through your database and it doesn't match any there. And it therefore then stalls what you do because you don't have a match for this fingerprint.
Yeah, we do. You have cases like that from time to time. What happens is, you remember, according to the police act, the police we are allowed to take fingerprints from persons who are in the lawful custody. So the database does not include every single person in the country. So you're gonna have persons who might not have hit the police radar as yet, but eventually they do. So we have those fingerprints in our system, and eventually when we caught up with you, we're gonna be able to make that match.
Okay, so once you find something that doesn't have a match, you still store
It's
it.
still stored. It's still stored. We're just waiting till when we get the fingerprints that's gonna match it.
Because you never know, someday they might decide to go again.
Yeah, some of you might get when we finally find a fingerprint. If it's 2 years, 3 years, how much it where a person's gonna be arrested and charged with that crime.
And this must be tedious work.
It is. It is. When you look at the fingerprint requires good eyesight. I can tell you that for a fact. You have to look at all of those small. This for the average person, you're looking at these lines on the fingers. We call them ridges. And this is what we look at the form distinct characteristics. And this will make fingerprints unique. The formation of these ridges on the skin. And this is what we're looking for. The amazing thing with fingerprint is that there's no two fingerprint that is exactly the same. Even on your own hands, all 10 of the fingerprints on your hands are different.
Got me looking at my hands right now. All right, now let's turn now a little bit to the photography, which is, I think, one of the most common and popular ones that we do see uh, uh, at crime scenes, where ranks are out there and they're taking pictures. Oftentimes, people are thinking that, oh, this is just easy work because anybody could just point a camera and take a photograph, but it must be something special
Yes,
for them to be doing what they do.
crime scene photography or forensic photography, as you call it. One of the main purpose photography is to document the scene. You see, when the case reaches the court, you need to present to give the magistrate, the judge, or the jury. They need to have accurate account of the scene as it was when the crime supporters arrived at the scene. So photography is, and also videography, and those areas come hand in hand, is the methods that we would use to document those scenes. Now, as you rightly said, photography in crime scenes are not done like a regular person taking shooting with a camera. You have to cover the scene, you have to take overall shots, you have to have linking shots, so that when you're looking at the photograph, you can be able to tell where this is and background and how it links to other surrounding items and those areas. So it's not just randomly taking pictures at the scene. These ranks have to be trained in these areas in terms of how to take photographs.
Right. Mm-hmm. And to be able to tell a story. In cases of, again, maybe murders, do they also have uh, to be part of or to complete their file, uh, photograph the post-mortem?
Yeah, that is also part of the
That is part
of
of
the
it.
department. So you have to be a mortuary and take photographs. And not only photographs, also the mortuaries and area we will also use to collect evidence. For instance, we spoke about the ballistics. A lot of times the projectile would be lodged in the body, and it's at the postmortem examination when we recover those stuff. So we have crime scene investigators at the mortuary as well, collecting samples.
So usually that's one of the reasons why most of post-mortems, especially of matters of that nature,
You have police.
you have the police, but particularly from your
Yes.
like your department,
Yeah, so all those matches we have police in our department.
because they will obviously know how to store it,
Yes.
handle it, and so on.
Yes, correct.
Very interesting and intriguing kind of job. And this, of course, would you say is a thankless job?
No,
It's
no,
not.
it's not. It's not. It gives you great satisfaction when you work on a case and you're able to see that case complete successfully. Not all the time you're not just looking at a conviction, but you're looking at the case. I should say, look at to serve justice. So now, sometimes you're working on a case, and once there's enough evidence, and the court finds the person guilty. So your job is the thing about crime scene is not you're not working to get a conviction, but you're working to present the evidence as it be. And that's your job as a crime scene investigator. You visit the scene, you document, and present it to the court. It's the court decision to decide on whether they should convict or whether they should acquit.
Know that uh, with the strategic plan of the Ghana Police Force, it spoke about the modernizing of the Ghana Police Force and obviously taking it into the 21st century. What would you say is your department's move or shift along that area in terms of the resources and equipment that are needed to aid in what you're doing?
Well, the thing about our crime scene investigation is based on our science. And as you know, science is ever evolving. Um, there's a lot of different new technology out there, and we're seeking to acquire a lot more areas. I mean, for instance, we're looking at some new equipment to automate some aspect of our ballistics and ballistic testing. We already have automated systems in the fingerprint department, and we're trying to move those areas ahead. And there are a lot of different new technology out there in terms of fingerprinting. We have, for instance, the old way of doing of getting fingerprints is through dusting. There are now new infrared systems that can be able to detect fingerprint much more effectively. And we recently moved to acquire one of those equipment. Ranks are being trained now in order to start rolling it and making use of that equipment. So we are working. Crime and criminals are advancing. They're using the internet, they're reading and so on, and they're trying to get better at getting away with what they do. And we have to keep up. We don't have a choice.
One of the complaints that you see oftentimes with people is on social media is the length of time that the police may take to, let's say, remove a body from a crime scene. And they often say that if it is that the police had moved faster, that person could have been saved, or that person, or evidence could have been, greater. Walk us through why sometimes, as much as the initial set of ranks get on the scene, there seems to be a waiting to the average onlooker or passerby uh, before certain action is taken.
Now, let me just clarify one point. If if there's an incident and a person is injured at the crime scene, the first priority of any police officer responding to that would be to preserve that person's life, even if it means that evidence will be destroyed during the process. The priority is saving life. So there's no situation where you have an injured person lying on the scene waiting for crime scene investigation unit. That person will be rushed to the hospital. That's priority that comes first. Now, the in other cases where you have a person where you probably have the EMT responding to the scene and pronouncing that person dead at the location. The duty now for the responders, the uniformed police, would be to secure that area, prevent access from persons gathering around. And again, we tend to have a culture of persons when we see certain things, a large amount of people rush to the area, and that kind of harms the investigation. You need that area to be secured, and so that when the crime scene our team arrive, that area is undisturbed. Fingerprint evidence and DNA evidence and all of these areas are there, uncontaminated, and it's important to have successful prosecution in cases. And this is something that not just the police alone, we need public support in these areas. It's hardly any scene where the police is discovered. It's almost always a civilian, some person discovers some person dead or some crime scene. And within the time that it takes the police to respond, you have a duty to help to preserve that scene.
What would you say to that person in cases like that? When it's a civilian that discovers someone dead, I think only I think today we did see a body was found in region 3. I think yesterday we discovered another body of a person who it was eventually found that he was stung by bees, but of course a post-mortem is going to determine that. So as you rightly saying, a civilian, and then they pick up the phone, they call. Uh, Between the 15-20 minutes or what's that for the police to get there, what should that person who made the call do? And the other persons who I would say are morbid, curious people.
Well, I'm speaking here presuming that the person is already dead. So within that period of time, that person now will need to take up a leadership role and try to keep person out from that particular seat area. I mean, you might not convince everybody, but you could get a few persons to work along with you, and you have to keep the area. And you advise person to keep out so that you don't contaminate, don't go and touch and turn and things. You got some cases where you might find somebody die and an accident scene. You see this a lot. Persons going and tumbling through the vehicle and all of these stuff. This is not right. It's not something that's supposed to be done. So that's why you need public support in order to stamp out and eradicate this kind of behavior. And you have persons there, responsible persons who need to take charge of certain situations until the police get there. The police is not going to be everywhere all the time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. In some cases, especially in accidents, we've heard so many situations about it. People say, well, they use the term that people are sick, they actually rob the dead. They go there with this pretense that they're helping, maybe to take them out of the vehicle, um, if it's a crash or what some, but they're rifling through pockets. There was a video on social media just recently we saw where apparently somebody was being the video was showing where two persons were fighting, right? And the video caught someone going up to them, operating as if they're going to part, but basically going into the person's pocket. That is maybe what you would say how society has become. Just went into the pocket, took what they had to take. I remember one night we left here and we actually walked into a crime scene. There were people who literally started to go and pick up stuff out of the people's vehicles. And it took a stern shouting by the police rank who was in plainclothes to get some of them to back off. And then seems as if that's their concern. People are literally there bleeding out and dying, but their concern is to see what they can actually get. I want you to elaborate a little bit more on that.
That is very distasteful. And it's very upsetting to watch a lot of those videos. You see people now in a position, you have an opportunity to assist, to help, and you use that opportunity for what should say, personal greed. And I think we need to, we gotta get a lot more programs and so on to educate people to move away from this kind of thinking. And I think you have upstanding persons in society who need to also, who are those seen, who need to voice and speak out more as well too. You can't have a few bad apples, I should say a voice for the minority prevailing because you have a few good men who do nothing.
All right, I want to come back and elaborate a little bit on that, but I rather suspect we've got a caller on the phone right now, so I want to open the phone line and see if we could take this call. Caller, a very good evening to you. Welcome to.
I was just listening now, so he was saying that the crime scene, if you go there, you can tamper with the evidence. Right? So let's put the breakdown police station, like how everything is being moved now. What is happening there? How can they know what causes the fire after all has been removed? Very good night.
All right, thanks for coming through. I'll let DSP Marcurius answer you.
Um, Stan, I'm not able to comment on specific investigations because these are matters that are actively before the court. However, the fire scenes, generally the main investigation are usually done by the Guyana Fire Service, and we would normally lend a supporting role. I would not be able to say whether they will be able to complete their investigation. I think that's a matter for the fire service to answer.
If I do recall, they put out a release about what their findings. They did put out a release
Yes,
shortly
as far as
after.
I'm aware, they do.
They did. But maybe if you address it holistically, uh, I think the general thing is how soon should a cleanup of a place happen? And this is not just for the recent fire at Brigham, but any crime scene. How soon should cleanup happen after a crime was committed? What is the recommended? Is there a recommended time period or a process or procedure that has to happen before?
There can be no fixed amount of time. You see, it all depends on the investigation. Depends on how, if the crime scene investigation aspect would have been completed, then there's no need to keep the scene. However, if it is incomplete, depending on, it all depends. These are decisions that gotta be made on a case by case basis. It's not something we could just look at and determine, well, this scene was not kept long enough, or this scene, and vice versa. This has to be made on a case by case basis by persons who are actively involved in that particular investigation. So you're not able for looking from the outside, it's very hard to tell whether how the investigation will progress in a particular.
There are cases where persons have written to the press or would have taken to social media complaining about in a case where, let's just say, it might have been a motor vehicle that belongs to them. It was involved in a criminal offense, let's just say the fetching of illegal or narcotics, or someone was shot in it. But for them, it's their, for example, it's their minibus, it's their livelihood, and you take it and you're supposed to you do what you have to do, but then it sits at the police station for a very long time. It's putting them out of bread. They can't get their vehicle, they can't get to do anything with it. You're still holding on to it, and they're only hearing, well, oh, it's not finished, even though you would have extricated whatever evidence that's from them, that you were able to. What would you say about that?
Now, from the crime scene aspect of it, when we would have finished process of vehicle, we would normally release the vehicle. But there, sometimes in some of these cases, you have other considerations as to why a vehicle would be kept as exhibit, and those would be done by other departments. But some of them have to be kept because of the court orders and a lot of other different cases. So that might be some of the cases. Some of these vehicles also you might see being kept. There's no owner, there's no legal owner. They don't have any registration and all of those. Some might be smuggled vehicles. A lot of different cases, reasons might be there why a vehicle could be kept for a long period of time by the police. But you hardly have a case where that the crime scene aspect, where just processing for collection of evidence will take months and years. That aspect would be concluded in most cases in a short span of time.
Sure.
Unless there is some form of some others outside of the ordinary situation.
In cases like that, where we would have had over the years matters of like drive-by shootings and so on, persons being shot in their vehicles and so on. Those vehicles were taken. Does the crime lab clean up those vehicles after processing evidence before returning to the owner or owners? Or do you return it just the way? Like, so someone was shot in a vehicle, and evidently the vehicle goes to processing because there are lots of bullets bullet holes that have riddled that vehicle too. So you're examining it and you're pulling your evidence from that. So the actual vehicle comes to you, but it's not in a state where it can't be used or fixed back or anything. When that is done, all of the blood and the gore or what's not that would have been in that vehicle, is that cleaned off or cleaned out before it's returned to the owner or owners, or you return it to them that way?
So we would remove the evidence, the bullets and the shell case and those stuff would be removed. But in terms of cleaning up blood and so on, maybe you have blood all over the seat, sometimes soaked into the vehicle, that would be beyond our capability. I think a lot of times you have owners who have to probably buy new seats in those situations. So we would assist in whatever way we can. However, there's some aspect of it that we will not be able, and the owner of the vehicle will have to stand those additional costs. So in terms of you have blood in the seat, the owner will have to facilitate having that vehicle clean to that extent and so on, or change the seats and so on. That wouldn't be a cause that the police would stop.
Have you had situations where persons then point fingers and say, well, I would have had X, Y, Z in my vehicle, and now it is not there now that it's returned?
Well, we haven't had that experience. I've been at the lab for a certain amount of period, and we haven't had that experience since I am there in the department. I imagine they probably would have had cases like that before, and those cases are usually, once they're reported, they would normally be thoroughly investigated.
All right. Why I did ask, because a lot of persons came out after there was the crash of the airplane. It was, I believe it was, that ran off the airway a couple of years back. There were some of those persons who responded, fire people by the way, who they found had persons' belongings and some of the stuff that belonged to that airplane in their personal possession afterwards. And so a lot of people were saying, oh, well, why don't police do the same thing to when they come? They take up everything or what's not, and then it turns to gone for evidence, and then next thing you know, the evidence disappear, or they can't find it. What would you say to that?
The particular case that you would have raised there, those cases was, as I tell you, once those cases are reported, once we have information about those cases, they are investigated and persons are charged and placed before the courts. The police force, like all other organizations and like the police force in all other countries, they will have cases. The employees you're dealing with human beings, and human beings are not perfect. You will have some cases where persons would, being law enforcement officers, would find themselves outside of the law, and they have systems in place to deal with those situations. But evidence in the police force are being properly handled. We have systems in place. For instance, at the CID courts, we have a property room that was designed by the Justice Dedicated Society to Canada. So we have those systems in place where evidence are logged, they're under video cameras and all of that stuff.
All right. Turn our attention now to it's 2021. You mentioned earlier that criminal-minded persons are getting more advanced in what they're doing, and it was, I believe, some persons who posited that I think it was at the last GIPEX oil and gas forum that with oil and gas, one of the things that will come is not only the good, but also some of the bad. And part of the bad is those persons who will be seeking to get involved in criminal enterprises and to fleece others. We had situations, for example, where I believe it was early last year, where a gentleman was found in a hotel room with a load of credit cards that they were manufacturing or making. What is the police force, particularly your department, doing to be able to get on top of that game, knowing that you've got some of those kinds of criminal minds that may decide to come this side?
No, some of the areas that we do to guard against those. I mean, there's eventualities. Those are things that are gonna come here, keep coming together. It's through training. We have a lot of training through. We have a lot of we have a lot of Caribbean countries. We have the Caribbean Basin Security Initiative, where we have various countries sharing information with law enforcement officers. We have online courses. Recently, we had a course on skimming of ATM cards. That's where you have certain criminals, and this is something that's common in countries like Trinidad and Venezuela and these other countries. We have sophisticated crime. Persons set up cameras and so on at these ATM machines and would skim money off of your card when you use the card into the system. So all of these police here are being trained in. We can't wait until those things, you have those crimes start raising their head here. You have to be training in advance, and that's something that's continuous with the organization.
It's continuous.
It's continuous.
Okay, that's awesome. Any recent cases that would have been before the court that are already adjudicated that you could make mention of that were as a direct success with the Ghana police force based on the work of your crime lab?
Well, we have quite a few cases.
I know you didn't say many, but any that were recently concluded where there was a conviction or there was here, this is the incontrovertible evidence that this is so.
We had a few cases, especially a large amount of cases from firearms, where persons would have been arrested for possession of firearms. Those firearms would come to the crime lab, and they would have to examine and determine whether these are indeed firearms. We have quite a few breaking into scenes and so on, and robbery scenes that would have been solved by fingerprint evidence. We had a murder case from over the river that we would have done, where DNA evidence as well would be able to assist significantly in putting the perpetrator behind bars. So we have quite a few cases where the forensic evidence is being used. And the forensic evidence is used in support of other form of evidence. You have the investigation department, and they would normally question suspects, and you have to work in collaboration. Sometimes you get a confession from somebody, you still gotta get forensic evidence to back up that confession, and vice versa. Sometimes the forensic evidence comes first, and from the forensic evidence, the person is confronted with those evidence, and they eventually lead to a confession.
So when you talked about DNA evidence. We have the capabilities in Guyana right now to be able to do some DNA testing, which is, of course, kudos. The years gone by, what would have happened, lots of times samples had to be taken and sent overseas, and you would have to wait inordinate amounts of time. How has the ability to actually collaborate with some of the other agencies, and particularly the National Science Laboratory, how is this impacting the speed with which you're able to crack cases or to be able to bring finality to some of those questions?
One of the main advantages of having DNA testing locally is that we are now able to send a larger amount of cases to do DNA testing. And what it's also doing to have it locally too also is going to help us now to create a database. When you send a sample overseas to a private lab, the lab would test just those samples together and then send you back a report whether it's a match or not. But when you have a local DNA lab, all of those cases, the DNA profile is in the system. So you create an entire DNA database.
You keep growing your database.
And you keep growing your database over time. So eventually you find cases that are going to link against previous cases and so on. So this is one of the main advantage of having the DNA testing. I think something that we look, I think presently they're working on legislation so that police now can be able to take samples from suspects and eventually be able to grow a larger database compared to what they have in the US and those other countries. So you collect a sample from a scene, you'll be able to have that database that we can send it to do a comparison against.
When it comes to DNA testing, and when we're talking now about sexual offenses, which is something that usually, because it's not discussed in the open, or even there's no trial in the open, it's usually in camera, based on legislation. One of the things when it comes to sexual offenses is to be able to get the kind of evidence that is needed. What are some of the possibilities? Is it like people just see on the televisions where you go to the suspect and you pluck a hair from them, or you try to get a piece of their clothing to go examine it? Is it the same, or is it a little bit more intricate in terms of being able to get those kinds of samples, swabbing and those kinds of things?
The theory that is being presented to you by CSI is true. However, it's not exactly the same. It's a much more painstaking process. Like for instance, you're taking a swab, it's not just go plucking in here. You gotta make sure that your gloves off, the conditions are sterile. And there's a lot, the way how you package it, it has to be properly air dried and or refrigerated and all of those things. There's a lot of steps that come into play in terms of dealing with this evidence. And DNA evidence, for one, is very susceptible to contamination. So you gotta have right conditions and so on in terms of doing it with those particular samples.
Can you recall in any case where there is no weapon used to kill someone, where, let's just say, like a gun or anything, but that person died and there was a struggle where you might have been able to find DNA sample maybe under the nails of the deceased, even if it is that they were then found in a decomposed state. And if they are decomposed, how does that impact the evidence or the sample that is taken?
One of the things with forensic evidence is that it tends to deteriorate with time, and DNA evidence falls within that category. Um, as the body decomposes to a certain extent, we will look at different areas to get recovered DNA. If the body is, if as it is more fresh, we get easily get DNA evidence on the surfaces. But once we reach a state of decomposition, now we have to go to other areas. We may have to take samples of bones and those other areas. So that is why it's important to get to the scene as early as possible. But there's some situations where you really don't have a choice. Let's say, for instance, somebody's body was buried for weeks, um, and then you find the body after that period of time. You basically got to work with what you have. So in those situations, yeah, in those situations there now, it depends on the timing and all that to determine which sample you decide will be the best. We do use fingernail clippings as a form of evidence, but it might not be the best source in every case. As I say, it depends on how long the body was exposed for and a lot of other different factors.
Finally, let's look at the situation of counterfeiting. Ghana doesn't print its own money, and there are many other documents that are important that we do not necessarily produce here. Uh, there are specific firms that do that for us. We've had in many situations lots of counterfeits being passed off on people, and a lot of people themselves were caught unawares, not even knowing it's counterfeit. But this is where the crime lab comes in. How does that work in terms of being able to identify the counterfeit?
Well, we don't do the counterfeit examination directly at the crime lab. What we would do is the police would package it and then submit it to the Ghana Forensic Science Laboratory. And they have the capability to do to determine whether the is counterfeit or whether it's a legitimate currency. So that doesn't fall directly under the crime lab. It would fall under the Ghana Forensic Science Laboratory.
Okay, so once it gets passed on
We
to
pass it on to them and follow the normal documentations, and they're going to examine it and produce a report as to whether and they're going to be that they're going to determine whether the person gets charged, and the report is going to be tendered as evidence.
all right. It's 21 hours 59. Can't believe we've been talking for practically an hour. I'd certainly like to ask you more because I'm learning, and I'm sure those who are listening and watching are learning too about this. Let me just ask for you to reiterate, however, ASP Marcurius. So there is this young man, there is this young woman who has a desire to get into this particular field. You did mention, however, that it's mandatory for them to have the necessary training in the Ghana Police Force as a policeman or woman. But what would be some of the basics that would recommend that they come with also, if it is that they'd like to be able to be a part of the crime lab?
One of the best to be a part of the crime lab is science. Science is an asset. Crime scene investigation, forensics, all based on science. And if let's say for a young man or young woman interested in becoming a crime scene investigator or a forensic examiner, the best route to pursue is areas in science, chemistry, physics, biology, and these areas. And so when you join the police force now, you come in the crime lab, you start doing crime scene investigation training, you're going to run into all of these different things. Blue card exchange principle and all of these different principles you're going to come out are based on science. So that would be my advice to you. As you're in school, focus on school and pursue sciences in your area.
Awesome. Science, physics, chemistry, biology.
Not leaving out mathematics.
And of course mathematics, because you've got to work in matrix and the matrices. ASP Ray Marcurius, thank you very much for spending some time with us on Policing You tonight. Looking forward to having you back again as we continue a very interesting and intriguing conversation.
It's been a pleasure.
And of course, a big thank you to all those of you who have been tuned in tonight on this edition of Policing You on this holiday night. My name is Stan Gouveia on behalf of Avinder Raj Bali, as well as we've got Simeon Brown in studio and the camera crew from NCN. My name is Stan Gouveia saying thanks for joining us on behalf of the CCU of the Guyana Police Force. Do be safe, take care of yourselves on the roadways. Have a good night.